Welcome into the horse race. I'm your host, Daniel Vaughn, and we are going to go through all the election results tonight. Obviously, you have the big news that Donald Trump has won. Republicans are taking the Senate. And as of right now, while I'm recording, it looks like Republicans are going to take the House. There's obviously a long way to go on that because we have to wait for California to count votes, and they take forever on everything. Plus, there are just some really close races. I've got a note here. I'm going to show you a few of the close House races just to show you how tight some of these margins are in some of these House races that will end up deciding the majority in the House. So we're going to cover all that, and I'm going to walk you through an actual exit poll. So one of the things that is available that you have is that the Associated Press and Fox News put together one of the largest exit polls in the country. They make it available. So I'm going to walk through it with you to show you kind of what happened in some of these battleground states, what happened nationally, because you might see some of these headlines in the press, but when you actually pull this apart, you can see it for yourself and go look for all these things. So we're going to walk through all that and more. Wanted to start off tonight, though, with my prediction map. So I had Trump getting a clean sweep of all the battleground states, and I thought there was a possibility that New Hampshire would come online. I had Trump right in at 317 electoral votes. He's going to actually have 312, so I'm only going to be 5 off from that, and that's because mainly the main extra battleground state that I thought might open up of New Hampshire did not go to Trump, but it was still close. I'm going to walk through why what happened in New Hampshire, Virginia, and New Mexico was a harbinger of things to come for the rest of the night. In fact, had you told me what was going to happen in Virginia and New Hampshire, I could have told you what was going to happen the rest of the night beforehand. So this is the finalized map. If you're watching now, I'm recording around 9 o'clock Central Time, Wednesday evening. This is the finalized map. This is what Donald Trump's going to walk away with. The decision desk HQ has called Arizona for Trump. That was the last one that we were waiting for. So that gives him a clean sweep of all the battleground states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. Clean sweep across all 7 of them. That's kind of where I thought it was going to happen. That's where my map said it was going to happen. That was also, if you follow a lot of the model talks, that was the number one scenario for Nate Silver. The top 2 scenarios in Nate Silver's model were a clean sweep for Trump or a clean sweep for Harris. Both of those depended very heavily on a polling error, one direction or another. When we were looking last week and the week before, I kept telling you, if you looked at the polling averages, things had shifted towards Donald Trump by around 2 points, which was sort of telling you where a possible polling error might be occurring. And that ended up being the case. If you look up here at the top, too, the big story, also apart from this, Donald Trump is leading in the popular vote right now. That will narrow down a little bit because we're still waiting for more votes to come in from the West Coast, mainly California. They take forever to count. One day, we're eventually going to have a purple California, and if it's going to make 2000 Florida look like a cakewalk in comparison, just because of how poorly California is run when it comes to counting votes. But that's neither here nor there. This is what we have tonight. The Arizona call just happened about 30, 45 minutes ago. The margin that we've got in here, according to the decision desk, they're at 73% here counting, and they're calling for Trump. And he's got around a 5-point lead here. So it's looking pretty good for him, about 120,000 votes separating him from Harris. That will probably hold here because that's just a lot for her to overcome at this stage. In the vote count, I bet we've got quite a bit. Yeah, we've got a lot in Pendle County, Maricopa, 74%. So things are looking pretty good here for him. That will end up standing. So the other one, the state that I made most of my predictions on was Nevada because it was the state we had the most data on, and the early vote told you the whole story of Nevada. It said that Donald Trump likely had a lead there, and that was the case. He's going to come in here and win with about a 5-point lead here, and that is a very good size margin for the state of Nevada. He's got every county except for Clark County here, which has got Las Vegas. And if you click into here, he held Clark County to a 1-point draw. That is astounding for a Republican here. This is the type of margin that you need. It's also why he's going to end up carrying this state. This is just flat out what he needed, and he covered all the margins that he needed to here. So Donald Trump wins. He sweeps all of the battleground states. That's sort of the big story. The next big story to note is if you're going to some places like Florida, Donald Trump carried Miami-Dade County by a very significant margin. In fact, it's not even gonna be close. It's gonna be about close to about a 12-point margin here when it's all said and done. This is again Miami, over 1 million votes cast here. Trump's gonna walk away with over 600,000 of them. If you go up here and look at Osceola, this is a Puerto Rican majority county in Florida. Trump's going to walk away with the majority here. There was a lot of stink made about, the Madison Square Garden event and a joke that was made regarding Puerto Rico there. It's not going to matter. This what you're seeing here in Florida with Puerto Rican voters here is the same thing that you'll find when you look at places like New York and out on the West Coast. Trump he won the Puerto Rican vote basically for all intents and purposes. You can look at the Venezuelans, you can look at Cubans. He did strongly across the board, and that's what gives you a very deeply red Florida here. I mean, Harris is only going to hit 43%, which is, I mean, we're talking a 13-point margin here for Republicans in the state of Florida. This is decimation. Do not quite go through what happened in Florida. This sort of happened in 2022. It got much worse. Florida is one of the most red states in the entire country. We're talking Texas type numbers here. Actually greater than Texas when you really break it down to. This is Florida is the new state and the headquarters for the Republican Party nationally. There's just no getting around that. This is sheer domination. This is not something anyone would have expected just 10 years ago. So huge, a huge spin with Florida. But where I want to start out here, as we're kind of looking at this map, again, I thought a sweep was most likely because of where the data was. Specifically, when you're looking at the early vote in Nevada, which was showing a very large enthusiasm gap between Republicans and Democrats. And I thought if that was happening out in Nevada, we would likely end up seeing it elsewhere. And that's exactly what happened. We saw it in Georgia and North Carolina very early on in the evening, and that continued across all of the Midwest states. But the reason that I thought more states could come online is that Donald Trump was overperforming his 2016 polling numbers, and Harris was underperforming in Clinton's numbers. So the state that I pointed to on that was New Hampshire, because in 2016 that state was only decided by around 3,000 votes. And so if you just return to a 2016 level, that would make a state like New Hampshire competitive. And it was competitive. If you look at the margins here, Harris is only going to walk away with about a 4.5 point lead here in the state of New Hampshire. The 4.5 points in and around that is roughly in line with some of the best polls that Republican leaning pollsters were dropping about New Hampshire, that people like me were looking at and saying, well, if that's well within the margin of error and he can make it competitive. So those close polls of New Hampshire ended up drilling it almost perfectly here. You're barely talking about a 30,000 vote gap here between Trump and Harris in New Hampshire. And so this was one of the first signs of the night. This in Virginia, and we'll back out and look at that too. Virginia is going to end up closing at around a 5 point gap here. Um, these states are states that Biden won by double digits. And when you see this early on, it's telling you, oh, this was actually much closer. Now you see, the margin here is about 200,000 votes between the two of them. That's pretty narrow for Virginia, given the number of votes we're talking about here. Deeply red across the entirety of the state. Um, but this close margin told you that Harris, if she was underperforming in places like Virginia, and if you look up here, the county that made it most notable was up here in Northern Virginia, where you've got a lot of government workers, a lot of if what we would call your usual Democrats. This 16-point margin for Harris, the last I saw, people were saying that was close to about a 9 point margin shift to the right towards Donald Trump. And so these types of shifts in Virginia told the story. And had you told me, the day before election night, so as you told me on Monday, hey, Virginia's going to be about a 4 or 5 point advantage for Harris. New Hampshire's going to be a 4 or 5 point Harris. state. If you go out here and you look at New Mexico, you're talking the same thing. Trump's 46, she's at 51. So again, about that 5.5 point margin there. Um, these were the stretch battleground states. If Trump made last minute plays there because he had some internal polls that said, hey, Mike can make a play here, um, they were actually within range. And if you knew that they were going to be this close at election day, you probably actually would have seen a lot more campaign activity, both from Trump and Harris, because those are not the type of margins that you want to see. And if they were closer, that told you that the rest of the battleground states were actually going to be leaning towards Donald Trump, and that's precisely what happened. So one of the first states that got called was North Carolina on the night. Decision desk called this one first. It became pretty clear early on that Harris was not meeting the margins that she's going to need in any parts of this. Trump was exceeding what he needed, even in the western parts of the state. So we did not see the feared impact that a lot of Republicans have in the western part of the state of North Carolina. Everything worked out there. In Georgia, you saw a lot of votes came in. We had to wait for the Atlanta area to come in. But once that happened, it wasn't enough to put Harris across the top. All of the rural counties in here in Georgia performed well above their 2020 levels. It was just an overwhelming thing, and that basically gave you the margin in Georgia, and it allowed Decision Desk and others to make that call. So the swing states moved uniformly. This was something that I hit again and again, that the direction and the statistics that you found in one state likely told you what was happening in another state. And in this case, what was happening in Virginia and New Jersey and New Hampshire and New Mexico, what was happening there was telling you what was likely going to be happening in some of these other states. Another state here, Texas. I want to cover this real quick because Democrats thought that they could make Texas partly in play, at least on the Senate side. Trump ended up winning by around 14 points here. This was just a sheer blowout. Again, what happened in Texas, and you'll note here, all these red counties was not even close anywhere across the line. It was just flat out decimation for Democrats. All the work that Democrats think that they had made, with Beto O'Rourke and all these things with making Texas purple, that's gone. That has gotten cleanly wiped out. I can go through some of the exit polling that we have nationally, and it kind of tells the story of what happened here. But you're seeing a strong turn from Hispanic voters, minority working class voters, all shifting towards Trump and Republicans in this race. So it was just a huge wipeout across the board. So Trump overperformed everywhere. Another interesting state here. So we talked just now about how Florida and Texas were strongly towards Trump. That was not true in New York. So Harris only won New York by around 11 points. This is the worst performance for a Democrat in the state of New York since 1988. So just sheer decimation. Every state, all 50 states, shifted toward Donald Trump, and that included places like here. Donald Trump, I believe he was close to within pulling 30 points in some of these boroughs here in New York City. So it got really bad for Harris really quick across the board. You would expected with Tim Walz on the ticket that you could have done better than a less than 5 point lead here, but they couldn't. This was actually a pretty close race in Minnesota. Again, it's not shocking that Democrats won this state because they typically do, but this was much closer. This looks much more like a 2016 Minnesota than it does a 2020. So what you saw across the board uniformly is Harris underperformed what Biden did in 2020, and in a lot of cases, she was underperforming what Hillary Clinton did in 2016. So that was my central thesis going into the night. That ended up being true, and it gives you the story of what happens across the board here. Step into the Senate here. Right now, Republicans are sitting at 52 seats, so that gives them the Senate majority. Their pickups are going to be in Ohio here, in West Virginia, and Montana. Those are the new pickups across the board here. They held in Nebraska. There was an independent challenger there. The remaining things we have outstanding right now are in Pennsylvania. That is with David McCormick and Bob Casey. There is a narrow lead here. So right now we're at more than 95% reporting. There is a 28,000 point gap between McCormick and Casey. That's why that hasn't been called yet. I believe McCormick probably has this. I have not seen anything that suggests that he wouldn't, just because I think they're beginning to run out of votes here on the Democratic side. But that's 20,000 votes. That's just not a huge margin here. So that has not been called for obvious reasons. It would not shock me if the Senate race here went to a recount of some kind, just because these are the margins here. I mean, 48.9, 48.5. That's, that's as tight as it's going to get. Although I'll show you one that's even tighter. So I think this is a good chance for Republicans to pick up. If they win this one, that could be your talk for 53. During my predictions episode, I talked about how these were my most likely pickup situations. I looking at the early vote. I thought there was a good chance that the Republicans could either win Nevada or Pennsylvania, and that's where we are. The Republicans were close in Wisconsin and Michigan, but they ended up falling short. So right now, if Republicans win Pennsylvania and Nevada, they give them 54 seats. If they just split one of these two, you're talking 53. So that's pretty much in line with what I expected. Carrie Lake down here in Arizona is keeping it close, but her margins are not really close enough here. There's still more votes coming in. I'm not optimistic in her chances there. If she was closer to a less toxic version of what we've had in some of the other states, like if David McCormick was running in Arizona, he would win the state outright. Would not even be close. This race is closer than what polling had indicated here, and that's partially just due to how well Donald Trump did across the board. But Carrie Lake pretty seriously has underperformed what Donald Trump did, and so that is hurting her here. The closest race, though, Sam Brown in Nevada is currently holding a less than 2,000 vote lead. You got 615 to 613 here. So that is 47.3% to 47.2%. That is about as tight as you're going to get. There are still some outstanding votes, I believe, coming in Clark County. We have potentially more coming in from Nye that could give him a little bit of a boost here. These are the when you talk to election prognosticators in that group, they point to these two right now as where most of the vote is sitting. There's some outstanding votes in Nye, which are believed to be pretty pro Brown. And then it's a matter of what's remaining here when you compare it to what's remaining here in Las Vegas, in Clark County. Will that be enough? Will Jackie Rosen be able to win the remaining margins of this enough to pull off, a come from behind win? Because Sam Brown's been in the lead here for most of the last 24 or 36 hours here, and that's just a function of Republicans overperforming wildly across the state, which was indicated when I was talking about John Ralston's data. Um, this was indicated across the board. This is likely headed for a recount too, just because you're talking about right now less than 2,000 votes. Whatever the final margins are here, I'm expecting it to be under 5,000. It could get under 1,000. We could be talking about a few hundred votes deciding who's going to get the 6-year term in the Senate here in Nevada. So I'm not expecting a call anytime soon. I've been surprised before, but this is so close. I'm just expecting this to take a little bit longer time. So that's sort of where the Senate map sits here. Republicans are +3 on the evening, as the map indicates here. The purple areas up here are the independents. So you have Vermont up here is Bernie Sanders. He is technically an independent, even though no one treats him as independent. And then Agnes King in Maine is also running as an independent. He will caucus with Democrats. So those are going to be two pickups basically for them. For the rest of the time, the other big pickup, it was Ohio. This was a closely watched race because there was a lot of money poured into it from both sides. Bernie Moreno is going to end up pulling this away pretty easily. Big win for Republicans here. This is what's helping set them up for a good night across the board, because this puts them, at 52. Republicans knew they're going to pick up West Virginia, and they were highly likely to get Montana. So this is what pushes them into the 52 range here. And then if they get lucky, if they pull off the hat trick here, where they get Pennsylvania and they get Nevada, again, that's 54 senators, which is fantastic. If they only get one of them, that's going to be 53. This is pretty much right in line with where I thought things were going to be. And it's all looking good. On the House side, Republicans are sitting at 212. The key number here is you need to hit 218 for a majority. So that's why the decision desk HQ is giving Republicans close to a 90% advantage here on taking the lead here. Um, to give you an idea of how close some of these races are that we're counting, up here in Iowa, Miller Meeks is running a race here where you're talking. It's currently under 1,000, around 800 votes, a little less than 800 votes are separating the Republican and the Democrat in this race in Iowa. And yeah, this if you follow these Texas House races closely, this was a close race 2 years ago. It was a close race before that. So I'm not shocked by how close this is. Likely headed to a recount here just because this is insane margins here. You're talking about parts of Des Moines and Cedar Rapids area, so there's a lot of suburbans, a little bit of urban vote in here. So going to take a while. Over 400,000 votes cast here. That's going to go late, late, late. And then, of course, you have your usual suspects here out here in California, which are taking forever. And we have a few close races here in Arizona. And then Alaska just takes a while, just because it's a very big state. There's a lot of absentee mail votes. You just got to give time for all that to come in. They're reporting about 74% right now, so it's just going to take a little while to figure out how that's going to go over. Oh, so Republicans are in the driver's seat to hit 218. Um, you're probably not talking about too much more than that. So um, yeah, 220 might be a good range place to friend the land there, because Democrats are going to make up the margins here once we get a better idea of what's happening in some of these West Coast districts. I feel pretty comfortable about Alaska, but you never know for sure, particularly given how close it is right now. But for the most part, most of these races are decided and called. It's just a matter of waiting for what's happening out west. And then, of course, you have a few oddballs in here still deciding. The big one, obviously, is going to be here in Iowa, because that's going to be a must win for Republicans, because that is a seat they've got to hold in order to keep their margins. So, razor thin margins across the board here in the House. 218 is the number that you need. Republicans are 6 away from that right now. We'll see. They've got plenty of opportunities here to win those 6, but Democrats can also make up that advantage as well. Nationally, what I wanted to do, so we're going to go back here and look at the presidential map real quick. So again, Trump sweeps across all of the battleground states. The New York Times has a great map here. And again, they haven't called places like Nevada or Arizona yet. So they're just 295, but that's obviously more than enough to make Trump president. This is the directional shift for individual counties. And did they shift to the left or the right? A red arrow to the right indicates a conservative or Republican shift. Blue arrows indicate a Democratic shift. And this sort of gives you the whole story. Uh, the directional shift were Republicans overperforming across the board. You see some blue here in and around the suburban area of Atlanta, up here in the western parts of North Carolina, and then you get some more out here and out west in places like Colorado and up in the Dakotas. And then there's a few blue arrows up here in the northern part of Michigan, which kind of should tell you exactly why Michigan was so close. But other than that, you're looking at Pennsylvania, you look at Ohio, the rest of Michigan, Wisconsin, and even Minnesota. It is a lot of red. And that was true pretty much all night and across the board. It's why Donald Trump is currently sitting with 50.9% of the popular vote. That will drift down again as we get more votes in from California, but still, he's got it right now. And given the margins that we're seeing everywhere else, I would expect him to maintain that popular vote lead as we're moving forward. So that will give him the Electoral College, it'll give him the popular vote, the Senate, and more than likely the House. So Republicans are very likely going to take the trifecta at the end of all of these things. Make sure I covered all of the things I wanted to in the House, Senate. I believe I have there. So what I want to do next is jump into exit polling. So you've likely heard, if you watched the election coverage, you heard a lot about how different news organizations covered election polls, because it gives you an idea of who the electorate is, what they voted for, and everything. And I always tell everyone, ignore those. As soon as polls close, there are exit polls. And I tell people, ignore those because you're going to get better data later in the night. Just wait on that. And also, it's just better to have that hard data. If you can see a county flip for a certain candidate, it's likely telling you what's happening with a more certainty than some of these other things. So, the main one that we have access to is the Fox News voter analysis. So, this is done in conjunction with the Associated Press, one of the wire services. There are technically two of these exit polls that happen. This is the main one that a lot of people reference because it is the Associated Press one. So, when you see wire services and other news organizations repeat the Associated Press, they're repeating what's happening here. There's another one done through Edison Research and all the big three, so ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN. They all use Edison Research for their exit polling. I don't have access to that one, so I'm not going to go through that one, but I do have this one. So just kind of walk through to give you an idea. So when you're watching, your TV coverage, this is what, on Fox News, and if you're not in one of those other ones, they're using this analysis here because this is what they get to everyone. And what these are in 2024, they completed more than 110,000 interviews with registered voters between October 28th and November 5th. So that gives them an idea of what happened, mainly in the early vote. And then they do some on election day. Um, they cover all 50 states and it gets you an idea of everything. So they try to get more than 3,000 in each of these places. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but it is just a huge survey, tons of people. So, normally in polls, we're looking at sample sizes between 500 to 1,000 potential voters. This is 100 to 1,000 across the entire country. So we have a very, very good idea of what's happening in this data. The way they have it set up, as you have the year, you've got the race. You can drill down into Senate and governor races. We'll stay on the presidential side. Then you can filter down into states. So this is all the data together. You can see here the actual number that they were sampled here was nearly 120,000 people. So just a huge number, and it breaks down and gets into smaller subsets when you start filtering down into the national level, the governor's race, things like that. This kind of gives you an idea of what the split looks like. So, would you describe yourself as a man, woman, or non-binary? You got Trump winning men. You got Harris winning women here. 7-point gap here between Trump and Harris on women. You got a 10-point gap here between Trump and Harris between men. So there was a gender gap here, but more men sided with Trump than women did with Harris. So you might. One of the big early polls was Ann Seltzer last week, who came out with her Iowa poll that showed Harris winning Iowa, which obviously didn't happen. Trump's going to win that by double digits. But it suggested that maybe the gender gap was bigger than expected. But when we started getting some of these actual exit poll numbers, that proved to not be the case. So what I'm going to do next is flip down into the state of Pennsylvania to give you an idea of what this looks like on a swing state basis. You can look at specific questions and things that they asked here. We're not going to bother to do that. But again, you see sort of similar thing here, 11-point gender gap here. You've got just a 5-point gap here on with women in Pennsylvania. So the gap for men between Harris and Trump, double digits, 11 points, just 5 points for women. And this is in Pennsylvania. So that gender gap is there, but is not as pronounced when you're looking at given things. Age groups here, always fascinating to see. The only age group, when you break it down into the 18 to 29, 30 to 34, 45 to 64, and 65 plus, the only great age group that Harris won here in Pennsylvania was the youth vote, 18 to 29. Everything else is pretty decisive advantage for Donald Trump. The biggest group here was 45 to 64. That was 32% of the electorate. That's where Donald Trump ran up a 7-point margin here, 53 to 46. So just huge numbers here for Trump when you start breaking it down by age. The racial gap here, Donald Trump won the white vote by 9 points, 45 to 54. With blacks, he lost it he pulled in 18 points here. In past elections, particularly when you're talking with Obama or Biden, This number would have been in the single digits. You're talking 8, 9%, maybe. At 18% with this type of number, you're talking close to 1 in 5 black voters went for Donald Trump. The Hispanic vote was the thing that everyone was talking about because in Pennsylvania, Donald Trump got 42%. And with other non-whites, he had 47%. So only a 3 point gap there. So, um, you know, these are much smaller. So your Hispanic vote's only 4%, your black vote's 8%, and then whites are 85%. So what happens up here at this top category, extremely, extremely important. Um, but still, you're seeing Donald Trump make huge gains with these minority groups in a swing state. If you just break it down between white and non-white, Trump wins white votes by 54%, and the non-white vote goes to him by 30%. So it's about close to a third here. Harris not breaking 70%. And again, these types of numbers here, uh, Barack Obama was hitting 75, 85, even higher percentage numbers here in past races. So you're seeing this drop precipitously. When you break it down by race between men and women, this is where you start seeing some of the breakdowns with that we talked about before. White women in Pennsylvania, 2 point Trump lead. White men, 18 points, 58-40. So huge advantage here for Trump. Black men, 75-24 to Donald Trump. So almost 1 in 4 black men in Pennsylvania went for Donald Trump. This is the best number that I can remember ever seeing for any Republican, going back through to George W. Bush in 2004. That was a huge victory for Bush. Black women, Donald Trump was able to get across the 10% line, hitting 13% here. These are important because when Trump is hitting these types of numbers, it really eats into the base of the Democratic Party. For some reason, we don't have any information here for Latino men. There is obviously information in there. So if you just break it down into white versus non-white, Trump is winning 35% of the non-white men and 26% of non-white women. So these are, normally for Republicans, you're usually hoping to get above 10% with some of these things, and Trump is hitting 26, 35%, and then outright winning the white vote in these states, which is the larger group of voters in the state. Let's see, we've got some more age categories here. Education. This is obviously a very big thing here. This is pretty much where everything kind of gets decided. You can talk about all the racial aspects that you want. Education is the line that kind of tells you everything. A high school less, 60-40, Donald Trump. Some associates or college degree, 5 point advantage to Trump. College or postgraduate, that's when you see the Harris advantage coming in. There's a bigger group of the some college or less crowd here than there are college graduates, and that is the margin that Democrats are dealing with. The Republicans and Democrats are sort of trading voters right now. The college educated people are moving into the Democratic Party, and you're seeing the working class voters with high school or just maybe a college class or two flooding towards Trump and the Republican Party. This group here still continues to be larger than the college educated crowd, but that's just where the parties are moving right now in this in this split. If you just focus college versus non-college, Trump has a 13-point advantage among the college educated, and Harris has an 11-point advantage among those with a college degree. But again, look here. No college, 57%. College is 43%. This college percentage here, that is growing, but it is still smaller than the non-college. So when you're just talking about raw numbers and trying to win a state, you would prefer to have a larger group of voters. Let's see. Going through education more. Household income. Very interesting to see here. Harris is winning the very low end and the very high end. Donald Trump pretty much squarely winning the middle class here. If you make between 25,000 and 99,000 a year, you probably voted for Donald Trump. Harris has her best advantage with those with under making under 25,000. Again, this is probably where a lot where that youth vote is going to start coming in here. That's her biggest margin here. But even with those making 100,000 or more, that's just a 3 point advantage for Harris. A little more traditional breakdown here. We're looking at 50,000, 50 to 99, and 100 and more. Donald Trump has the middle category here with Harris having a 1 point advantage here with those under 50,000. So really, this is a little bit tighter. And when you get into the spread here, it kind of gives you an idea of what's happening across the board. Some Berliner questions, MAGA questions, liberal. So, it just kind of goes down. This is obviously very long, uh, a very long thing. One of the things that people were noting here is that if you denoted in the poll that you were a mom or a dad, so a parent of a kid, Donald Trump won your vote. If you were in any other category here, it was a little bit closer, but yeah, here you leaned Harris. So this parent vote here was leaning towards Trump. Same here. Are you the parent or guardian? General yes or no. Trump won that vote. And it just goes on like this, and on like this, and on like this. They go through issues and so on and so forth. I'm not going to do all that because we could literally be here all night. Um, Big issues coming out of the exit poll were things like the economy and democracy. The economy is kind of basic. I think that's easy to understand because you're talking about things like inflation. You're talking about wages and jobs, just your basic bread and butter economy questions. Um, the democracy question is a little bit more difficult to tease out because when Democrats see that, they automatically think that applies to January 6th. But when Republicans may answer that as being their top issue too, because you had Donald Trump almost dying in an assassination attempt. You had the shooting on the congressional baseball field with Steve Scalise getting shot. You have these flashpoints here on the right that are reminding them, yes, we agree, democracy is a big issue. We have to protect it. And one of the things I think that got missed in a lot of analysis leading up to the election is that that democracy question did not necessarily mean that you were leaning towards Trump or Harris. It just meant that you valued it in a way that was probably different than what pollsters were picking up. It's like when you say the economy. Some people who answer the economy as their number one thing. Some people may be referring to inflation. Some may be referring to something like just their job or job prospects, that sort of thing. So some of these vague questions got twisted in certain ways to meet certain media narratives. But when you really started digging down, you started seeing some different things in there. So the exit polls were kind of a good idea to get that because you could see, oh, well, we've got this democracy question here and we've got this economy question here, but Democrats are agreeing with this part of it and Republicans are agreeing with this part of it. So you kind of have to tease it out here. So these are the early exit polls. There will eventually be a second level of analysis done when they pull out the voter files for some of these different states. Um, Folks like Echelon Insights, Patrick Affini, they are great with that kind of analysis. Go follow them on X/Twitter. He'll talk about all sorts of things going there. Um, so big night for Trump. A lot of the storylines that you had going into the night that women were a big issue for Trump. They were. He did not win women as a whole, but he didn't lose them at the margin that some of these polls were suggesting. So he wasn't like a 20, 30 point gender gap like some of these polls were suggesting existed. So um, that suggests, when you have that kind of split there, that there was in fact a polling error for the third time, and that polling error went towards Donald Trump given that he's likely going to carry the popular vote, the Electoral College, and walk out with the Senate and House. Um, we're probably talking about a 2 point polling error in Trump's favor. Most polls had it as a tied race, and it's looking like it was a maybe as much as a Republican +4 environment, but more than likely a Republican +2 ish environment. I'd like to see what the final actual generic ballot looks like. But I suspect Republicans are going to have like a 2, 3 point advantage on that. So it is continuing to be very difficult to sample and poll these working class voters who are going for Donald Trump and Republicans in some of these races. And until pollsters are able to adequately fix that thing, you're going to continue to see these sorts of issues. You may not, though. It all depends on how they vote in the future. But for right now, um, it's very difficult to poll that. And we've been seeing polling errors now for that specific group, working class. It's applying across all racial groups now. They're just not answering the phone, or you're oversampling those who are voting for Harris, who are more eager to sit and talk on the phone. So a lot of issues for pollsters to work through here. Going through these exit polls, going through the voter file, that's going to give them a lot of ammunition to learn from mistakes that happened in this go around. Um, Where we go from here, I'm going to continue covering some of the data as it starts coming out here, because it's just really interesting to see how the country voted and what that could tell us in the future. I'm also going to get into, how Trump is going to start forming his administration and how that impacts polling and his approval rating moving forward. So there's still a lot to cover post election, and we're going to get a lot more stories like this where we're covering different parts of the election. So stay tuned for that. But this is what we're going to cover tonight. Got all the states covered, House and Senate. So stay tuned on the Senate side because I think that margin could still go up, and watch that photo finish out in Nevada because that race with Sam Brown, that's going to be really close, and no one has any idea of where that's going to go. So that's all I've got for tonight. Thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you guys next time.